Foundation.
Good morning. Thank you all for being here. It's a pleasure to see we have 4,000 people from 56 countries at the mHealth Summit this year. I want to thank our partners HIMSS and the NIH and NIH Foundation for the creative work in making this such a full, impactful, and rich schedule, and something that all of you have helped us co-create every year as we plan it. I'm so proud to be here. I'm Kathy Calvin. I'm the CEO of the United Nations Foundation. We were founded 15 years ago by Ted Turner, another great innovator and visionary in the tech field, who wanted to do something to support the United Nations, make sure the U.S. always appreciated its strategic value to our country, and most importantly, to have the ability to create public-private partnerships in support of the great work the UN does around the world. There's probably no better area for us to demonstrate the power of public-private partnerships than in mHealth. So several years ago, when the mHealth Alliance was being created, the UN Foundation stepped up and said we would be happy to host it, and we are a strategic and founding partner of the mHealth Alliance. We're big believers in all things mobile, and under the direction and leadership of Patty Michelle, the mHealth Alliance, as you know, is making significant strides. We've seen the power of mobile technology improving health care for people who often don't have access to the services that they need. And we're also excited that the Mobile Alliance for Maternal Action, you might know it as MAMA, is launching their first program in Bangladesh later this month, with South Africa and India quickly coming on board. We know that's going to be another great demonstration of what can happen when we bring the power of technology to a really vital service. My first order of business this morning is to kick off our program with a phenomenal speaker who happens to be a member of the UN Foundation board, but has many other attributes to bring her to you today, and it is Dr. Nafis Sadik. Dr. Sadik began her professional life as a physician, practicing obstetrics and gynecology in rural communities in her native land of Pakistan. In 1987, she became the executive director of UNFPA, which is the UN's population fund, with the rank of Undersecretary General. This made her one of the highest-ranking women in the UN system and the first woman in the history of the UN to lead one of its major voluntarily funded programs. She's currently our board member, but she's also a dynamic leader and a guiding force in the field of international maternal and child health and reproductive and sexual health, including family planning, as you'll hear today. She champions the idea that women's health and well-being are best approached through the lens of reproductive and sexual health within social and economic context of all women's lives. She's going to speak to us today about her interest in the role that mobile technologies can play in improving the lives of women around the world. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Nafis Sadik.
Good morning. Thank you very much, Kathy, for a very wonderful introduction. I'm very pleased to be here at this very important global summit. I think it's an idea whose time is not just come, but is long overdue. I would have added something else in the end of that. The technology, business, research, and policy is programs, of course. But I assume that this includes programs. The mHealth Alliance is the ultimate partnership. It combines the power of technology challenged in the private sector with the power of public institutions and not-for-profit foundations, synergizing the best aspects and increasing the capacity of all concerned. I was very happy to be part of it as a doctor, as a scientist, and as a former head of the UN Population Fund, and now, most importantly, as a board member of the UN Foundation, and of course, as a woman. The mHealth Alliance is a step towards better health for women. It is a step to increase and promote gender equality, two aims which are closely linked and for which I have worked all my life. I want to say to you that I am 83 years old, so you can see I've had a long history and a long experience behind me. And I started with the concept that health was just health services. And I quickly realized that health for women is not just the provision of services, which is an essential part, but also to take account of their environment and where they live and their conditions of life. The spread of mobile technology is the biggest and the fastest change in my lifetime. When I started work as a young OBGYN in Pakistan, if you had access to mobile technology, it meant that you had a car. In the villages where most people lived, for people who had never seen a telephone, and a few still had ever heard of one. Those were the kinds of technologies we talked about then. Today, mobile phones are everywhere. Even in the extremely poverty-stricken countries of the world, you see mobile phones everywhere. In my country, and I saw in India as well, all the beggars had mobile phones. And I was asking them why they carried mobile phones. They said, well, we tell each other, our connections, where the best place to stand is, and they move there quickly. So you see the multiple uses of mobile phones. I think crossing the email means helping many minds on the bikes and in the mopeds around the world in our very physically challenged environments where health centers are located. Really is an idea who you wonder why it didn't start off much earlier. Men still sit in the cafes as they always did, with cups of coffee in their hands, but on the other hand, instead of water pipes, each one also has a telephone. There are now 110 million cell phones in Pakistan alone. I think there must be say 700 or 800 cell phones in India, and so on in all of the countries. I think in Bangladesh, I'm not sure that every single family does not have a mobile phone. Mobile technology has enabled traditional businesses and sparked a whole range of new businesses. Farmers and bus drivers and truck drivers have them. Fishermen who are out in their boats have them. And of course, young people use them in all sorts of different ways. Of course, some of the health issues are being challenged by the use of mobile phones. And I'll just use one example, the HIV/AIDS area, where the sex workers are no longer in brothels but are using mobile phones. So access to giving them services has become much more difficult. I'm sure that your minds will work on this aspect and find a way to put them together somewhere. As a result, we are all changing. I'll see you on Facebook and in perhaps in some George Orwell type of setting. Some are changing more than others. Whole groups are left out of the mHealth business, of course, and that's the group that we need to get access to, especially the poorest of the poor. Women I have to tell you that the lighting here is terrible. Women in general are just likely than men to have access to mobile phones, But in Asia, I noticed that that is really also changing, that a lot of women have access and sometimes their husbands don't. I think that's a good sign that women are sort of using technology much more aggressively. But in any case, it can make a huge difference to everyday life, and certainly in the health area, it is making a huge difference. But for the mHealth Alliance to be fully successful what is needed is that it must reach the women most in need, the less privileged and the most excluded, precisely the women least likely to have access to mobile technology. Bringing mobile technology to these women is a major challenge that the market almost cannot meet, but I'm sure with all the brains now that are working on this, you will find a way to do that. The second challenge is simply to deliver services to all who need them. Sexual and reproductive health services today are directly mainly at women and their children. They often do not reach the poorest, the young people, the unmarried, or many men who seem to be out of the service. And here men are a disadvantaged group. They do not reach groups on the edge of society like migrants, street people, the LGBTs in our countries. And again, the market alone cannot solve the problem. The third challenge is to empower women themselves to reach out and make use of the tools and the services that are available to them for through all these alliances and services. It means that women must be able to take advantage of those services like health and education, because they don't know the power of decision over their own lives, but that can raise themselves, and that their own move, if they don't have the empowering services like health and education. But again, to make that happen, the changes have to take place in their families and in their societies. Technologies can help them in leaping the obstacles that plenty of women have seized the opportunities that have been offered to them through this mobile technology to improve their own businesses, and some even create businesses, for example, by renting out some of their cell phones and making calls on behalf of people. This is very common in Bangladesh, for example, and many women are earning a living just doing that. Thanks to mHealth, more and more women are educating themselves. They are accessing health information and advice about services and also about their own needs. These women are everywhere in the developing countries, but they are very much the minority. I want to underline this point. Mobile technology is a very useful tool, and I hope it will soon be owned and available everywhere. But it is, in short, needs to have an effort put in to make that happen. It must be combined with targeted investment in women's health services and equally important education and information services that can be accessed through these mobile technologies. I'm sure things that you are working on together, and that the very important message for mobile phone users and makers and carriers is also important, that all these aspects must be addressed together. It's also, in our countries, it's important for the government to be involved, because to get this access and scale up services, it's the government that provides all of the services everywhere. and they must at least be positive towards it, and in some cases maybe even helpful, though not always the case. But the private sector, obviously working together as you are doing in partnerships, can do very tremendous things. Healthcare for poor women is often rudimentary, or in some cases totally non-existent, especially, as I said, sexual and reproductive health. Pregnancy and childbearing are issues that you are focusing on, major cause of death and disability in developing countries. In some countries, the major cause of course, are budgetary and individual initial reasons for, which is that women's health is very much neglected in the health sector itself. But the real barriers are not technologies or financial, they are in people's minds, as some of you who work there must have already realized. Let me give a few examples. In my travels and discussions, I find policymakers who still regard health services for women as a matter of charity or of social issues which are, which can be left out if resources don't permit it. Especially preventive and basic health care or primary health care. They look at education sometimes in the same way, though I think the importance of education is becoming more and more visible. They can't or won't see the economic benefits of empowering half the population. That's 50% of the world's population, and indeed a little bit more in many countries where life expectancy for women is higher. Certainly for the business community, these are the consumers of the future, and especially when they become decision makers. Policymakers are reluctant to extend information and services to young people, especially in the field that I work on, sexual and reproductive health, including HIV/AIDS prevention often, apparently believing that what they don't know will not harm them. And of course, we know that quite the contrary happens, and that girls don't, what girls don't know seems to kill them every day. Maybe a slight exaggeration, but it is absolutely true. In most countries, girls are ignorant about sexual matters, reproductive health matters, and they don't know about them until they are married. They remain especially vulnerable to HIV infections, high-risk pregnancies, illegal and dangerous abortions, and so on. In the world of mental obstacles, marriage is seen as a safe haven for girls in many of our societies. But again, people are wrong. Early marriage means early pregnancies, which can be and often is fatal for girls under a certain age. In fact, in maternal mortality, as many of you will know here who are experts, in young people is higher in many of our developing countries than births at a later age. And then they have many side effects and so on, which are often not treated, pushing them out of the labor force and pushing them out of their normal lives and not in part of the social system. There's a human rights aspect here, of course. Girls and women have the right to decide on matters that concern their own lives and their own health, but many in our societies, as you know, don't have those rights. And I'm making these points just to show you that it's not just health services alone, but there are other issues in our society that must be addressed if we are to get services to those who need them, especially in the rural areas. And in most of our developing countries, it's girls and women the services for whom are not given the proper priority. Finally, men in general seem to also have a mental block, especially in the area of obstetrical services, sexual and reproductive health services. They have a double standard about sexual behavior. They refuse to take responsibility for avoiding pregnancies in many of our societies still in 2012, or they should be, or for sexually transmitted diseases. They think of pregnancy and childhood as something that just happens and is normal, and that it's normal if the girl or the woman dies. And they also have to be educated and informed, and I think mHealth programs must target also public education as part of their drive to improve the health of the marginalized and hard-to-reach populations. Removing the mental aspect should then be one of the primary aims of the mHealth Alliance and of the partnership between mHealth and health providers. The first message for our advocacy should be that gender is not a niche or a minority issue. Women are half the world, as I said earlier. They have the same human rights as men, including the right to health and education. Protecting the health and promoting the education of women and girls is also essential for sustained and equitable development, and for equitable health services and access to these services. Holding back women holds back development for the entire country. Secondly, we need a frontal assault on gender discrimination. Along with poverty, gender equality has been accepted and assumed to be a fact of life. That, as we know, is wrong. As with poverty, we challenge these assumptions. The mHealth Alliance must address gender issues, including gender-based violence, the connections between poverty and women's health, economic security, and special investigation, including the right to raise and vote and hold office, and all of those things need to be supported and could be essential part of the mHealth educational package. Thirdly, integrated sexual and reproductive health services should be a primary goal of healthcare providers, or should be an essential goal of healthcare providers, and a primary target for my view of mHealth advocacy. In the real world, women don't lead separate boxes for family planning, for HIV/AIDS prevention, for maternal and health obstetrics, or even for the care of their children. They don't, therefore, not have to go to different boxes to get all these services. I think the mHealth Alliance, as it's developing its models, need to see how in essential information on many aspects that connect with each other can be provided, and while you are also organizing your services, how you can bring them to one-stop services rather than having to go Monday to something, Tuesday to another thing. If you know the lives of poor women in many of our countries, that's going to be impossible. So some of these areas will suffer, and mostly the areas that suffer are the ones that that concern their own health and their own lives. I think that women don't have a lot of time to look after their own health, and the way that we can make it simpler is to simplify the kinds of things that they must do to get their basic health services. Finally, men must take responsibility for their own behaviors. Men must also be responsible for the health of their families. In most of the societies, men make the decisions, and therefore it's essential to target men in the education and in the information programs. I think in many of our countries, culture and values, etc., are used as an excuse not to do something. As I have always said, culture is meant to protect everybody. They cannot be used to discriminate against a group of people. and most of the discrimination and cultural practices, as you may know, are directed at women. We need to find a way to condemn these practices. All strong cultures find a way to adapt and to change. And culture is not a static thing, it changes, and therefore we must also be able to speak out on these issues in our advocacy kinds of programs. In our advocacy, the mHealth Alliance should be pushing at on all aspects together. Countries have accepted all of these aims, including the basic aim of women's empowerment, of gender equality, of access to full health services, to sexual reproductive health services. These are all part of the Millennium Development Goals. I'm sure you have heard of those. And progress towards these goals is happening. In some countries it's quite rapid, but the one goal that is really far behind is the one on gender equality and reduction of maternal mortality, even though there have been some progress, but a lot of countries are lagging behind. So the area of women's health in the Millennium Development Goals is the area that is lagging behind, and for all of the reasons that I've already stated, of the low priority given to women's health, the low attention given in the services, etc., is the reason. The Secretary General has, as you know, launched this major program, Every Woman, Every Child, and as you know, the UN Foundation has its own very impressive program of the Girl Up, which in fact starts to look at the health of girls before they reach maturity, and look after the needs of girls in adolescence, etc., through a big partnership. And I hope that the mHealth Alliance in that area will develop technologies which will help these programs. And let me make a few suggestions for immediate action. First, mHealth should include women in designing the technologies and systems in programs meant to benefit women. Secondly, mHealth should encourage women's involvement in disseminating systemic obstacles to participation and help them on how to eliminate those obstacles. Third, mHealth interventions should include women's empowerment and gender equality as an underlying issue that affects their health status, but also affects their ability to use the health services that are provided to them. And the mHealth workers that you will be addressing, a lot of field workers, etc., need to also understand and find ways to deal with that. For example, if you tell, an mHealth extension worker talks to somebody and she gives all these symptoms of what's happening to the woman in labor, and the final advice to her is bring her into the hospital. She has to find the husband, she has to find transport, and she may never be able to get there. One has to think of solutions for situations like that. I know that some women will not be able to get the services they need, but maybe there must be some ways to use the extension worker, the person that's on the ground, which is the reality in many of the countries in the developing world, give the best that they can and forget whether she's allowed to or is supposed to or not, but how to actually save that life. I want to leave you with that message that saving lives is your mission, and I wish you all success, and I think this is the way of the future. Thank you very much.